At the time, I was probably 13, Craig was 14, Jen 15, and Chris was 16. We are all males. Chris and Craig are brothers. Jen and I are their cousins. But Jen and I are not related. We are, however, still close to this day. It was late August in Plymouth, Ohio. We were sitting on the roof at my cousin's house because the window out of Craig's room led right to the first-story roof, which was almost flat and had a tree right next to it, so we would sit out there almost every night and hang out together. It was a little past midnight. We always stayed up past midnight, and my parents would get so mad because I would be tired the next morning when they picked me up. I remember there were fireflies out in the field, which was probably 200 feet long and 100 feet wide. On the left of our view, there was a country road, as we were in a very rural area, and across the road and down one block there was an old cemetery, which my older cousins always told me horrifying stories about, as any proper older cousin should do. On the right side of our view of the field was a small grouping of trees, and then literally a 60-foot straight drop to the river. You couldn't climb it because it was very crumbly. At the far end of the field from us, there was a pond. It was dug with a bulldozer a few years earlier, and was only about 15 feet deep, but there was only ever like a little puddle at the bottom at this time of the year. I remember it being pretty bright out and almost a full moon with no clouds. We could see very well, and there was nothing to hide behind in this field. It was wide open, up to the tree lines that surrounded the property and the tree line across the street. Chris saw them first. I was talking with Craig and Jen about some video game, and then Jen noticed Chris was staring. Jen followed his eye line, and that's when Craig and I looked towards the riverbank. The trees were providing enough shade from the moonlight that it was hard to tell what it was at first. Then it came out of the dark and started walking in the field. I was frozen solid. It made no sense in my head. It was a German Shepherd head that was attached or being worn by this thing. I couldn't even breathe at this point. He was walking like he was drunk. I remember he was wearing a plain black t-shirt and dress slacks. He wasn't a scrawny guy, nor was he massive, but rather above average build. I'm not sure if he could see us, but it really felt like he could. Anyway, I was scared and I couldn't move, and Jen suddenly yelled out, "Who's there?" The person turned and looked at us, and started walking directly towards us. As we were on the roof, we were probably really easy to spot. The person didn't say anything, he didn't run, he didn't even make gestures towards us, he just kept walking. Craig ran up to the window, opened it and climbed in. Jen followed and Chris grabbed me and pulled me through the window. When we went inside, Craig told his dad, who was a huge gun enthusiast. His dad, after about 10 minutes, had a shotgun and was putting his boots on to go outside. I remember during that 10 minutes, there was noises of something pushing on metal, a door opening outside, we think it was the garage, and a really loud crash, which we couldn't figure out what it was. Craig's dad went outside and started to look into the field, and being the stupid kids we were, we walked outside the door to see, but didn't go far. I saw blood all over the garage door handle. The garage was not connected to the house, rather about 5 feet across from the house between the house and the field. My uncle ran around the garage and we couldn't see him. Chris spotted the man again, who looked like he was either coughing or laughing by the way his torso was bouncing his shoulders. The man jumped over the bank, and by the time my uncle noticed him and got across the field, he was gone in the darkness. My uncle called the cops and told my parents, and no one really gave it much thought. There was a posting on a few streetlights about a missing German Shepherd. A few weeks later, they found a decapitated head of a little girl in the woods by the cemetery that was a block away from my cousin's house. I don't think I could go back there at night anymore, even now that I'm 25. I worked for a county cemetery department years ago. We would go to all the cemeteries in the county and mow or just do basic upkeep. Occasionally, people, mainly farmers, would stumble upon some headstones in a field or a strand of trees, and we would come out and prod the ground with dowel rods to find more headstones and reestablish the cemetery. Soon after I started working there, we got a tip about some headstones a farmer found while clearing out a path through some trees for easier access to his field. It turned out to be the oldest cemetery in the county, dating back to the 1700s. After investigating some of the names on the headstones, it got really creepy. The story is that before the cemetery was there, a schoolhouse stood there. The teacher were a husband and wife. It's not clear on exactly what happened, but all the students and the husband and wife died in that schoolhouse. The information we found kind of made it sound like an illness of some kind, and they were all quarantined in the school until they all died. After that, the school was demolished, and the students and husband and wife were all buried right where the school stood. This incident happened to a relative of mine and his younger cousin and some others. I will call this relative Dave. He and his wife were in their 20s at the time and had not been married very long. This incident happened in the 1990s. Dave had a younger cousin who was being raised by her grandparents. The grandparents lived out in the country and there was not really a lot of kids her age to hang out with around there. So he, as in Dave, and his wife would often invite her along if they were driving into the nearest city to see a movie or play mini golf or something like that. It was the cousin's 13th birthday. She wanted to have a sleepover, so it was decided that it would be at Dave's house. The cousin invited 5 of her closest friends. Anyway, they decided later that night to go to the graveyard, I guess just for the thrill or something. There's not really much to do in that tiny town anyway. In our small town, the graveyards around this area are located out in the woods. This particular one was surrounded by thick woods, no houses nearby. It was small and had a chain link fence around it and a street light near the gate where you enter. The caretaker had a street light installed at some point, presumably to deter teenagers from going there to drink and party. Well, Dave and his wife and the 6 girls all exited the car and walked around the graveyard and were laughing, joking, chasing each other, etc. They finally got tired of playing around and decided to go back to Dave's house. They all went back into Dave's large 70s model car. The girls piled into the back and of course, he and his wife got into the front. All the females were talking and giggling. Dave, sitting in the driver's seat, was getting ready to crank up the car. While this was going on, they heard a tap on the driver's side window. It was not a tap like someone using their knuckles. It was a metallic noise, like someone was using a light metal object. Everyone looked through the window, and there was a guy standing there holding a machete. The machete was responsible for that tapping noise on the window. Dave and his wife said this guy was dressed like Rambo. He was not wearing a shirt, had some kind of rag tied around his head, and was painted up with green and brown paint, kind of like, I guess, army guys paint themselves up when going on maneuvers. Dave assumed it was possibly someone needing help, so he began opening his door to get out and talk to this guy. When he did this, he said his wife and all the girls started screaming, "No!" and diving for the door. The girls were diving over the seat and his wife across the seat. They pulled the door shut and locked it and frantically began locking all the doors. And then the girls and Dave's wife all started screaming at Dave, saying, "Go, let's get out of here, hurry up, just go," and words to that effect. While Dave put the key in the ignition, the strange guy started doing these weird karate moves like you might see on TV. He was spinning the machete around and doing a few kicks. Dave cranked up the car and took off out of there. Later that night, they rode back to the graveyard to see if he was still there, and of course, this time they had all the doors locked and he didn't get out of the car. They thought they saw someone lying on the graves towards the back of the graveyard, but it could have been a trick of the lighting. To this day, we still don't know who this individual was. Personally, I believe he was either on drugs or seriously mentally ill.